This series is a professional development lecture series hosted by Columbia University's Earth Institute's undergraduate and graduate programs. My name is Rachel Grace, and I'm a current student in the Master's in Public Administration program, studying environmental science and policy at the School of International and Public Affairs. I am moderating today's event on behalf of the program's Professional Development Committee, which I chair. Today, we will be speaking with Mera McGrew, the founder and CEO of SoPly, on their approach to running a sustainable business. Mera, like I mentioned, is the founder and CEO of SoPly, a soap startup committed to selling the best soap for you, your skin, and our planet. Delivered directly to your door with a donation attached to every ounce of soap sold, SoPly makes improving and saving lives as simple as washing your hands. Mera has lived, worked, and conducted research for the Smithsonian Institute, multiple academic institutions, and the private sector. She is dedicated to the communication and dissemination of scientific information and is passionate about elevating the public awareness around global social and environmental issues. She has written for National Geographic, the Huffington Post, and was managing editor of Mission Blue. Mera received her bachelor's degree from Vassar College, where she studied neurobiology, behavioral biology, and political science. So with that, please join me in welcoming Mera to the sustainability space. Mera, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, and Rachel for that very kind introduction. I'm excited to dive into the discussion and answer any questions that folks have. But before we do that, I thought it would be helpful background to share a little bit about why I'm so obsessed with soap saponification and the global importance of hand washing and how it is that I came to start a soap company. So I'll share that to start us off. For those of you who are not familiar, SoPly is more than soap, as our bottle very boldly states. We say we are the best soap for you and your skin. And what we mean when we say that is that we're crafted using pure food-grade organic oils. We're made in Middlebury, Vermont. Our suds masters, that's what we call our soap makers, have been making soap for over 20 years. Our product benefits from their craftsmanship. We are not just natural and organic, we are also certified made safe. We go through a 360-degree lab test to ensure that what you're putting on your skin is in fact safe for you, that it won't bioaccumulate. When we say that we're the best soap for you and our planet, what we mean is that SoPly is bottled in recycled glass. We're printing the labels directly on the bottles, reducing packaging and waste where we can. Our bottles are meant to be refilled and reused. We know that every second, 20,000 single-use plastic bottles are produced. Your soap does not need to come in one of them. When we say that SoPly is the best soap for you and that it helps improve and save lives, what we mean is that every ounce of SoPly soap is tied to a direct donation. More specifically, every 8 ounces of SoPly soap is tied to a $1 donation that helps fund water, sanitation, and hygiene initiatives around the world. We work one area at a time, one community at a time, and we work with a local grassroots organization that helps implement our product and service solutions that fall within our theory of change. I started SoPly, or I first had the idea for SoPly when I was living and working in Africa, working around water sanitation and hygiene. And in East Africa, I saw this gap around hand washing, and I saw children getting sick from diseases like diarrheal disease and respiratory disease. And I realized that hand washing, something that all of us might take for granted, is something that is still a luxury that's out of reach for many. Today, as I talk, 2 billion people around the world still lack access to even the most basic place to wash their hands in soap. One statistic that I learned while living and working over in East Africa was a statistic that's depressing and that also changed the course of my life and led me to where I am today, selling soap for a living. That statistic is that 1.4 million children under the age of 5 continue to lose their lives every single year because of diseases we could prevent through the simple act of hand washing. And again, I'm talking about diarrheal disease, I'm talking about respiratory disease. I'm not even beginning to talk about things like COVID or Ebola. I decided I would move back to the US. And I, again, had this lofty vision that I could change the world by convincing people to change their soap. And it was only in coming back to the US that the mission of supply really expanded to extend beyond what does it look like to improve and save lives globally, but how do we actually solve a problem that we're facing right here in the US? So the surprising thing to me was that soap in the US was shockingly unsafe. It was largely unregulated, not required to be labeled, at the point where we were looking at formulating over 2,100 soap products on store shelves contained an ingredient that was either acting as a known carcinogen or a known endocrine disruptor. And these were products that were labeled as natural and organic and that were being sold on store shelves for a premium. So when I decided to actually launch Supply over 4 years ago, this idea of taking this everyday product that we all use and turning it into a radical act of good or opportunity for good was really the starting point. When I set out to start Supply, when I actually started Supply, we were looking at solving three very unique problems. We wanted to create the best soap for you and ensure that it was safe for anyone that walked through your door. Whether it was a family member that was going through chemo, it was a child that was suffering from eczema, or someone with sensitivities or allergies. We wanted to ensure that it was simple for you to do a little bit better by the planet. We know that we all care about the plastic problem. We've all seen the plastic on our shores and on our beaches, and we wanted to make it easier to do something about it. And then we wanted to tie every single sale to real and measurable impact that would create real and measurable good around the world. So like I said, when I first moved back to start Supply and told people I would be changing the world by getting them to change their soap, a few people said I was crazy. My friends and family, some of them among those people calling me crazy. But there were a lot of people that joined me, that decided, you know what, I'll buy Supply, I'll gift Supply, I'll share Supply. And today we are in the hands of many. Fast forward, over 4 years later, last year, Supply was named the soap of the future at UN Climate Week. We are in households across the US and across the world. Beyond being in homes, pre-COVID and now too, we're in offices, we're in restaurants, we're in stores, we're in gyms, we're in wine bars and coffee shops. We are partnering with like-minded retailers that are pushing things forward. We're testing our sales, our product, and our messaging on store shelves of partners like West Elm. We're on store shelves at the largest non-toxic clean beauty retailer, Credo, Onda Beauty, Feed, and many, many more. ABC Carpet and Home, I think, is our latest retailer for those of you in New York. And we're really proud to be pushing sustainability forward anywhere and everywhere that we can. One of the ways that we're doing that is through a recent initiative that we launched alongside some true giants at the World Economic Forum over a year ago now, Loop, a modern milkman zero waste style system that allows you to purchase Supply, use Supply. As soon as you're done, your bottle is empty, you alert the system, we come back, we pick it up, we sterilize the bottle, refill it, and return it. We have, without paying PR, without paying influencers or paying for paid ads, we have found our way into the homes of Hollywood A-listers, everyone from Chevy Chase to Jessie J. We're in the hands of professional athletes, influencers, celebrity chefs, and more. And again, we're doing it without paying for advertising. We still don't have a PR firm, and we don't have anyone in-house that's pushing PR forward. But we're making headlines, and we're doing that organically. We're doing it because of our community, because they're using the product. It's working for them. They believe in not just the product itself, but the mission that we're all on. And you might have seen Supply in Vogue and the New York Times recently, in Departures Magazine, in Food and Wine, Domino, you kind of name it, Mind, Body, Green. This slide snuck in there, but here you go. In the last 3 months, we've been in quite a few publications from, I guess there's some missing, but from the Skim to Packaging Digest, and realizing that, it's not us pushing this forward, it's the market looking, and what opportunities we have as a market leader. It's something that I'm really excited to talk to you guys about today. I think that the thing I'm most proud of sitting here today, this year especially, is the impact that we're having, knowing that your purchase supply purchases, our community is already making a real and measurable difference around the world. We know how important hand washing with soap is, especially now. And for those of us that might not think of it as a luxury, it's hard to even fathom what it means to not have access to that. But this photo here, this is Haywan. Haywan is a young student at Adinafis Primary School in Tigray, Ethiopia. She's at a school where we're funding water sanitation and hygiene, and her having the ability to wash her hands and her classmates having the opportunity to have the opportunity to wash their hands, it means a whole lot more than just having clean hands. It means that, Haywan here has an opportunity to stay healthy. And when she stays healthy, she's able to stay in school. And when she stays in school, she has opportunities and equality over time. And that's worth, staying up late every night selling soap. It's worth hopefully washing your hands over. And it's certainly what keeps me going. I think that this year, we're all reminded of just how important and unifying soap is. Soap and the universal need for hand washing is something that crosses boundaries, and borders. It crosses geographies, races, age. We all need soap. We all wash our hands. We wash our hands because it keeps us clean, but more importantly, because it keeps us healthy. And this year, right now, as we're reflecting on all that 2020 brought, it's certainly an opportunity for supply to look and say, what is our role? The growth we've seen this year has been incredible. And with that growth comes a responsibility to look at what our role is, not just in the lives of our own community, but how do we inspire others? How, as we're working with others within our sector and pushing other sectors forward, how do we do that in a responsible way? How do we do that in a sustainable way? And hopefully we can get into this a little bit more, but I was having a discussion last week with the amazing Nikki Silvestri, who's out in Berkeley, and she put this question forward to me, and I thought it was so beautifully put, something I think about often, which is, what is inspiring me every day? What keeps me going? But then also, what is my responsibility in how I show up, especially as we grow, especially as we have opportunities to make larger and larger decisions that impact not just our company, but so many others. So for now, I think that hopefully Rachel and I can dig into some deeper questions and discussions, and then hopefully we can all talk as a group and I can answer any discussions, but certainly excited to be here. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share Supply and our story.
Thank you, Mera, for that great introduction to the brand and for your time today. It's such a pleasure to have you here today. So as this is a professional development lecture series, I thought we could back up a bit and actually discuss your journey first from, both in your professional career and then even maybe perhaps your academic career, and the steps that led you to the place where you identified the problem that then launched Supply.
Oh God, okay. It's so funny. In hindsight, it all makes sense. I started my career at Vassar. I was an independent researcher for the Smithsonian while I was finishing up at school. And really, immediately after graduating, I went directly into a lab. I was working in a laboratory connected to the NIH. We were doing antimicrobial and antibacterial research. And interestingly and fittingly, it all feels very connected right now. We were especially interested in looking at anti-drug resistant E. coli and MRSA, the impact of antibacterial soaps, the use of hand washing, hand sanitizer specifically. These are all questions that were coming into the lab and that we were looking at very closely. What I was specifically doing there was sitting under a hood. We were looking at compounds that would hold pharmaceutical value and that did show anti-drug resistant, promising prospects in the space of drug discovery, I should say. So this introduction to what does it mean to be antibacterial? What does it mean to be anxious about the antibacterials we're putting into our ecosystems, how that impacts our waterways, our environment? That's all stuff that right away in my career I was already focusing on. And then if I look at kind of the jobs that I had prior to Supply, It does. It all fits. I was working with National Geographic and then met an amazing woman who hopefully all of you know, and if you don't, please look her up. But Dr. Sylvia Earle. She was the first female head of NOAA. She's a National Geographic Explorer in Residence. She's on most boards that you probably know, from WWF to, I think, the NRDC. So I had an opportunity to learn from and travel with her around the world, really focusing on protecting the world's oceans. What does it look like from a scientific perspective? Why does it matter from an economic perspective? And how do we push the needle in terms of legislation? And then what was the reality, and I look back and I think how much that influences what we do every day at Supply. I distinctly remember sitting in on a discussion with her and two scientists who'd just come back from the Ross Sea, and they had done a sailing trip, and they put a net, I guess, 2 feet below the boat. So 2 feet below the surface of the water. And they ran the net as they sailed for a minute. And they went to pull the net up and they couldn't, it was so heavy. And when they got it on board, it was just a net full of plastics, these tiny, tiny plastics. And we all knew it was happening. And this is when you kind of started to see these images of the albatross with the stomach open with the plastic. But so all of this to say, this career that seems sort of odd, all has led to where I am now. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does. I think I'm particularly interested in how you went from working in the sciences to then going into more of a business setting and then founding your own company. I feel like that's a really fascinating trajectory. So if you can maybe talk about that middle piece.
Yeah. So the move from the laboratory, from behind a hood so that move was from the world of science to how do we communicate science? How do we allow researchers to tell the research that they're doing that's so important in a way that could reach the masses? That was something I was really, really interested in. How do we not tell stories from, whether it's using language that makes it really hard to understand or identify with? So communicating research became something I was really interested in. And I was looking at the opportunity to start my PhD and got offered a job at National Geographic at the same time and thought, oh, that's my childhood dream. I better take that. And it did sort of just happen. I was working, so Mission Blue, you mentioned, I was working with Sylvia Earle on Mission Blue. And she was connected to National Geographic and TED Talks. She'd won a TED Prize. And I was talking actually through TED and through Mission Blue, and got offered, after my talk, got offered a job in the for-profit tourism sector to build out their positive impact approach and their giving. And I immediately said, no, I have no interest in tourism. This is not an area I have expertise in, and quickly realized that the community that they were looking to build was something I was really interested in. Asilia Africa was the name of the company, the third largest tourism operator in Africa at the time. And what they wanted to do is say, how do we allow and welcome tourists into these beautiful parks and reserves? And how do we simultaneously fund social projects and conservation projects that are so critical to the long-term sustainability of this business? And what was really interesting to me about that specific job is that it's very rare that a company, a for-profit company, doesn't look at CSR as part of their marketing or just this kind of like catch-all, but really looks at it as part of their bottom line. And if you think about tourism, especially a safari, if there are no animals around, no one is coming. And so the investment in conservation, the investment in social projects and initiatives, it wasn't looked at as an afterthought. It was looked at as, this is protecting our business. And it offered an opportunity for me to build out a team and have access to a budget that at that point in my career, I just hadn't had access to. And so it was a really amazing opportunity. And being there, I saw what really sparked Supply, as I alluded to in this presentation, which was, water was getting funded. Anytime that we were funding anything that had to do with education, female empowerment, you name it. At the end of the day, water, sanitation, and hygiene were tied to it. And what I kept seeing is that people wanted to fund water. Water is really sexy. You know, you see a kid holding a glass of clean water for the first time, and you just know what that means. You know how that's going to impact someone's life. The idea of funding a hand washing station, truth be told, most of us don't think of that as a need. It's not that sexy, and it doesn't get funded. And what I saw is these projects, we would go and visit them. And even after the project had been funded, in the best case, I won't get into the really depressing stuff, but in the best case, you know, 3 months in, 4 months in, the hand washing station that would be built from metal would already be rusted out. And there had been no education around behavior change. And when you looked at what is the impact of investing in something as simple as hand washing, it's pennies on a life. And if you look at health interventions globally, like what's moved the needle for even our life expectancy as humans, like hand washing is such a hero. Soap is such a hero. It's changed modern medicine. It's changed our life expectancy. I mean, this year we've all heard it again and again. I'm not the only one shouting it from the rooftops. You know, Fauci, the CDC, the World Health Organization, your mom, we're all saying the same thing: wash your hands. It works. It's cost effective and it works. I don't,
Awesome.
hopefully that answered your question.
No, that completely answered my question. So, okay, after you identified the problem, what was your process from the ideation to actually launching the brand? And was there a time gap? You know, what did you do in that time gap? Since you didn't come necessarily from a strict business background, you know, what were your challenges? And then also what were maybe some things that helped you because you didn't come from a business background?
Yeah. So my previous job, one of the things that I did have access to was I had done some work with the UN and policy on high seas. And I had some connections that I made quick use of. As soon as I saw this gap in the communities where I was working, I quickly asked this question: is this a gap that's just right here in these communities? You know, we're working in 18 regions. Is this something just here? Is this localized to the region, or is this global? And I started asking anyone and everyone I could, do you have any information on this? Who should I be talking to about this? And quickly started getting white papers and research from folks at the UN, folks at the World Health Organization, at FHI 360, and was reading anything and everything while working on the ground there and going and trying to see for myself, where are the holes? Like, what's the global problem here and what's the reality of it? And who's involved in helping fund it? And why isn't it getting funded in a better way? Why are these benchmarks that should be there not there? So that was the starting point. And I very much was still fully employed. And it was partially for the job I was doing. And then when I realized I wanted to start a soap company, I thought, oh gosh, I better learn to make soap. So I did. I took my background in science definitely helped, because, you know, you might know how to make soap because of Fight Club, or you might know how to make soap because of, you know, your chemistry class, which saponification is just the process of making soap. You're taking a fatty acid and you're combining it with a lye, and at the end of that reaction, you have soap. And so my background in science served me well, and I started making soap. I took vacation. I went out to Colorado, where I'm from. I grew up in Colorado, and I turned my mom's patio into a soap factory. I made her make soap with me. I had all of my friends and family testing soap. I started traveling around and meeting with anyone that was making soap. So I thought, you know, this is a time-tested process and product. We've been making soap for hundreds of years, thousands of years. And I decided, okay, I better learn from these people who've really perfected it. And so I've made soap with the oldest family that's making soap in Tripoli. I've made soap with soap makers in France. I've made soap with soap makers in California and Africa, in Kenya and Tanzania, in Ethiopia, in Colorado. And then we ended up landing on working with soap makers in Vermont. They were able to use some of what I thought were really important restrictions around formulating things like, how can we remove palm oil? Mm-hmm. Which turns out, you know, is a cheaper oil. but not necessary. And how do we begin to push the needle, and how do we do it while also appreciating the craftsmanship behind the product? So I really came from it from very practically, if I'm going to sell soap, I better know how to make it.
Mhm.
And I better be able to know what it means to have a high quality product. How do we test it? How do we continue to evolve? How do we improve upon something that's already there? Or how do we double back and say, you know what, we've evolved, and what we've created, because we've had true soaps for so long. And then what's on the market in the US, most soap on the US market is not soap, it's a detergent. Detergents are really good at stripping away, right? They're so good, in fact, that they strip your hands, the natural barrier on your skin gets stripped away when you're using a detergent soap. And so actually, one of the things I found by working with these amazing soap makers is the detergent soaps that we're using, they're too effective at stripping.
Mhm.
Regular soap works just as well at removing any dirt and grime, COVID. We know that true soap works just as well as a detergent soap. So how do we start to relook at these products and ask, why did detergent soap become what it is? And the truth is, it became what it is because it's cheap. The profit margin is really good. And it also comes with some serious health and safety concerns for you and the environment. And how do we address those? And how do we start transparently talking about it? How do we educate consumers about it? Because no one taught you to turn your soap over and look at the label. You might do that for your food, but you probably don't do that for your soap, and you probably should. So how do we start moving the needle, making these decisions just, more interesting, more accessible, more educational? Yeah.
Great. So we have a lot of people here from all kind of disciplines at the school. So, policy people, business-minded people, science people, sustainability management people. Why did you choose specifically to create a consumer brand to solve the problem versus try to come at the problem from a policy or an NGO standpoint?
Yeah. So I think, I personally really am interested in the role that for-profit companies can play. And I think that they can play a very positive role, and that there's a lot that they can do that, for example, an NGO might not be able to. In this case, the reality is that water, sanitation, and hygiene get funded together as a group. And water has a ton of benchmarks around it, right? If you funded a water project, you're going to know, was it a water catchment system, a rainwater catchment system? Was it a well? What was it? What were the markers on it? What's the quality of the water? You're going to have water testing. When it comes to a latrine, for those, I think most people probably know what a latrine is, but a toilet, if you're funding latrines, you're going to say how many holes were installed. Is this a latrine for just girls, for boys? Is it for teachers? Is it a healthcare? There's a ton of benchmarks and reporting around it. And when it comes to hand washing, the problem is there is no global indicator for hand washing. There's just no benchmark. And if there's no benchmark, whether you're at the government level or the NGO level or the private sector, if there's not a benchmark, if there's not a way to measure success or failure, you're not going to have a line item. And what happens on reporting, what I was seeing, getting back to where did I start with the problem, was you would go in and you would see a project, and it would show, the report would show water was funded, sanitation, hygiene, all of it. And you'd go, and there's the water, there's the latrine, and then you walk over to the hand washing station, and it's literally a plastic bottle with a hole in it. It's called a tippy tap. And that in one project, at one project site, represents a hand washing station, and there's no soap anywhere. And then you go to another project site, and there's a full-blown sink with multiple taps with soap right there. And it has the same indicator that there's a hand washing station. And from the funder, from the NGO, whoever it is, looking at that report, you'd never know the difference. And the truth is, at the funding level, if you're an NGO, like I said, water is sexy. And I realized that the for-profit sector, someone like supply, could come in and really focus on something that's not as sexy. We could really own it. And we could come in after water was already funded. after the latrine was already there, and we could just take those projects to the finish line. It's like the last 2% of a wash project, and it is so important. And for me, I just realized there's flexibility in it. We had the ability to fund things really fully, things that, might not actually end up working. And other projects, whether it's an NGO or other, might not have that same luxury. So that's where supply came in.
That's great. That actually brings me to, it's a perfect segue to my next question, which is, could you expand a bit on your theory of change, specifically with supply and I guess exactly what you were just saying. So you come in at the end of a project after it's been funded and you bring it to the finish line. If you could just talk more about the ethos and the philosophy that guides that, and then maybe how you pick projects, and then how you measure your impact, since you mentioned metrics.
Yeah. Well, a few things. One, I'm not sure how familiar everyone listening in is on, pinpointing a social problem and creating a theory of change. But I think that one thing that comes to mind for me is that oftentimes people in the aid world will give a little eye roll if you give examples of, for example, Tom's Shoes. Who super well intended, an amazing company, and there are so many companies like this. But all of a sudden you enter into a system like this or a company that has a give back, and the initial give back, the idea, it's so altruistic and it's so amazing and good. And then fast forward 5 or 10 years and you look back and you say, oh my gosh, we've addressed a problem that was never a problem. Or accidentally here we've funded, whether it's, shoes or anything else, we've donated this product, and it turns out that product was actually being produced locally and was helping fund an entire economy and creating jobs. And so actually undercutting an economy is never what a company that is looking to make a positive impact is wanting to do. And so making sure that we knew very clearly, what is it that we're trying to solve here? What is our problem? Our problem is that specifically, access to soap is still a problem. Access to a place to wash your hands is still a problem. We want every healthcare professional to be able to wash their hands before they administer any kind of healthcare service to any patient that they see. We don't want a single mother having to, give birth with a healthcare professional that hasn't been able to sanitize and wash their hands properly, putting them at risk, the baby at risk, the healthcare professional at risk. We want every child to be able to wash their hands that goes to school. It's an access issue. And so what is the problem? Making sure that it was actually a problem. Mm-hmm. The statistic I shared, 2 billion people still lack access to a basic hand washing facility today. That's our problem. 1.4 million children under 5 losing their life every year because they don't have access to a place to wash their hands because of dysentery and respiratory disease. That's our problem. And then the question becomes from there, who's tackling it? What governments are involved? How are they funding it? What NGOs are involved? How are they tackling it? How do we learn from them? How do we come in and actually fill real gaps that we can fill? And what's unique about soap and hand washing is you have healthcare professionals, you have local wardens, you have, principals all raising their hands and saying, hey, everyone, we need a place for the kids to wash their hands. We need a place for our healthcare professionals to wash their hands. We know that our dysentery rates and our respiratory rates are awful. We know that we're seeing a loss of life prematurely, and we want to stop it. And so having local individuals raising their hand and saying, we know how to stop it. We need some help. We need some money. It's a short-term help that's offered, but longer term saying, okay, how do we start to fund these solutions in a way that's really focused locally so that we're funding local employment. We're looking at impact in terms of jobs on the ground, money on the ground, and local ownership. And so when it comes to how we assess that, for us, it became, okay, where in the world is access to soap an actual problem? Because let's face it, Columbia's in New York, we're based in New York City. We can go to I personally can walk down to the bodega and buy soap. there's a Starbucks on the corner or there's a McDonald's on the corner, and they have a bathroom that's open, and in that bathroom is soap. And so access to soap for us is not something that's a real problem, though it is for some in the US, and not to dismiss that at all. But globally, where is the largest access problem? And it turns out that in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, that's where access to soap is the biggest issue. And personally, you've heard my story, my network, my knowledge base is much more centered in Africa. My experience on the ground there, working there for over 2.5 years before starting Supply, offered me a bit more of grounding to start Supply, and connections and knowledge. And so starting in sub-Saharan Africa just made sense. We're focusing our impact in Ethiopia. We specifically currently are partnering with REST, the Relief Society of Tigray. And Tigray might be a region that some of you recognize, especially recently. The news coming out of Tigray is heartbreaking. I mean, for me personally, it's incredibly sad. For those of you who don't know, on November 3rd, fighting broke out in Tigray, and I won't get into all of it, but communication has been cut off from that region to the rest of the world. So there isn't internet connection or cell service. So our partners have made contact with us to let us know that they're okay, but it's a really scary time, and it's a time that also has me looking and reflecting quite a bit. It's also a time where we realize, what we're giving, the role that we have, the impact of, our community's purchases. It's so great. And yeah, I'm happy to answer loads of questions about that as well. It's kind of divergent, but really important, and something I'm thinking a lot about, because our impact partners are people that are really more like family. They're our team. I last year was in Ethiopia for almost 3 months, spending time with these individuals and helping come up with these benchmarks that we're using, helping come up with some of the reporting we're using. We've worked with Harvard a bit on how we're starting to structure some of this, how we're actually measuring some of this. And again, we can get into that. But yeah, we're really starting from the ground up. We're creating some of this, and some of the data that we're collecting now, we realize it's going to take a few years before we can put it forward in a way that's going to really move the needle. But the goal here is we want to ensure that all of the data is open to anyone who wants or could use it. Open sourcing all of our data, open sourcing all of, our resources that we come across, our procedures, our protocols, all of that.
That's a great other segue. So I'm very interested in how you pick your partnerships. So my understanding of Supply and why I came to you to be our speaker today is that many sustainable brands focus on one part of sustainability. So they might, have a great impact story, but then maybe they don't look at how their employees are treated, or what the ingredients of their products are made, or what that's doing to the environment, et cetera. But I know Supply is attempting, and it is looking at all of those things at the same time. So when you pick your partnerships, whether it's on your consumer brand side or on your impact side, are you also looking at their sustainability in your diligence? Is that something that's important to you? How do you communicate that? Are you actually able to move the needle for them in any way? If you can talk about that.
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, in terms of one of the questions I'm sitting with right now is, what does it mean to be a sustainable company? What does it mean to be a leader in sustainability? How do we define sustainability? Like at an individual consumer level, how do we define it? But also, how do we, again, getting back to kind of how Supply approached, creating our product, formulating our product. How do we learn from individuals that have been incorporating this into their lives every day throughout history? There are so many cultures that have sustainability ingrained in everything that they do. And the word might not be sustainable, it might not be sustainability, but it is there. And one of the things I think about is how connected we all are. Supply is soap, but it's more than soap, you know? It's next to your sink. When you wash your hands, that is this radical act that allows you to invest in your own health and the health of others. That soap goes directly down your drain. The suds that end up in our water systems ultimately end up back in our water that we're drinking. And it can bioaccumulate, it can have an impact. The bottle itself, it gets tossed and it can end up in our ocean. And so if you start to look at systems and you start to look at connection, you realize that whether it's a partnership, a retail partnership that supply is going to be on someone's shelf, or it's an individual consumer that's sharing supply, or it's a partner that we're implementing product and service solutions on a global scale with, they're all connected. And making sure that the overlapping values are always there, that's a brand promise. And so when it comes to retail partnerships, it's a question of what's the reality of our size? What could we benefit from? And what could that partner benefit from? And for supply, there's an amazing opportunity for us to not only share our product, but also educate consumers about our mission and our story. And having access to larger audiences is a big part of that. Working with West Elm, for example. West Elm is pushing sustainability forward through textiles, through their local makers. They also are pushing sustainability forward with supply and, inviting me to come in and teach their entire staff, having Williams Sonoma's leadership team fly into New York to learn how we're tackling hygiene, how we're tackling sustainability, what we're asking ourselves. So Supply, this little soap company, which is growing quite a bit, but still little, is getting to help inform how executives at this retail partner of ours is thinking about sustainability generally. And then when it comes to, Credo Beauty, we look at them as a partner in the safe and non-toxic space. They're pushing the needle forward in terms of how do we start to ban ingredients that just aren't safe? Mm-hmm. As a consumer, we have a limited amount of time in the day. And at the end of my day, the last thing I want to do is go to the personal care aisle, take pictures of every product I'm thinking about buying, and then going home and Googling everything to make sure it's safe. And so how do we make it easier for consumers to trust and to actually be able to have products that work first and foremost, but also don't come with questionable health and safety concerns? So working with partners that we think are helping push the needle forward, that will help us not just, when it comes to Credo, and other beauty brands in this case that are tackling some of the same non-toxic issues, Supply being able to go forward and come to Washington, DC and try and push legislation forward around toxicity in our personal care products. That's a big deal for us. And that's one of the ways that we look at retail partners in that space. And then on the impact side, one of our impact partners is Laughing Man, who Rachel and I both know, and looking at how do they think about profit? What does it mean not to just sell a cup of coffee at Laughing Man or a bottle of soap at Supply, but what is the impact of that? What is that dollar exchange worth? Mm-hmm. It's about community, it's about people. And it's about investing back in something that's greater than this small product, whether it's a consumable, in the form of coffee or a consumable in the form of soap. How do you use those profits for good? Mm-hmm. I'd say, all in all, it's a crazy way to think about it, but the system, the way I think about it, is just connection. Everything is connected. And if it doesn't make sense, if the connection doesn't work, it's a no for us.
So, there's a lot of people here that are thinking about next steps once they graduate. And I'm sure there's decent interest in either starting their own sustainable company or, working at a startup and helping it blossom. So what is your recommendation for people that might get disenchanted or frustrated that they can't do all the sustainability initiatives at once, that they have to maybe do step by step, integration of these different initiatives.
Yeah.
Have you had to do that yourself with Supply? And what's your advice in thinking about that?
Yeah, I think, okay, well, first, if you're looking for a job, Supply is going to be posting some jobs for hiring. Also, this is a good time to actually be finding new work. There's actually quite a few startups and founders I know that are looking to grow our teams and want people that are thinking, ahead and are looking at sustainability and prioritizing that and wanting to make that a part of their career. So that's one. The side of what does it mean to think through like a step-by-step approach to sustainability versus an all at once. For me, I can only answer from my own experience, but the reality of recognizing the size of Supply, where we are, and the limitations that come with that has been really, really important. Because at the end of the day, to be a sustainable brand, it means we need to exist. To be able to achieve everything we want to achieve, we need to be able to thrive. We need to be able to make money. And that means, we need to make a profit every time that we sell. And we can't just be writing checks left and right. And this is a question about, I think business in general, which is how do you want to run your business? What kind of business and system do you want to be a part of? It's a question I think about when I look at VC funding and the system behind VC funding. What does it mean to be taking that money? And for Supply, the answer has always come back to, okay, how do we ensure that we're able to pay everyone involved what they deserve? How do we ensure that we're doing the best we absolutely can when we can? And when we know better, how do we do better? How do we immediately correct? If we see something that has gone wrong, how do we correct? We're small, we're gonna make a mistake at some point. Hopefully we haven't made any big mistakes yet, but one example would be, we have a limited edition artist series. It's so cool. I'm obsessed with it. I think artists are amazing. I wish I was an artist, but the power of art to tell really complex stories, it's awesome. But we worked with an artist that wanted to put their artwork on our bottle in a red ink. And I thought, oh, that's awesome. Yes. And went to our silk screen printers, our bottle printers, and outlined what the vision was. And a little bit of due diligence later, I realized that printing red ink on glass, which, by the way, think of all of the places where there's red ink on glass, from your measuring cups to beauty products. There's a lot out there. It's illegal in the United States to print on glass with red ink because it's so toxic. And, as a startup, I've never printed red ink on glass before. I never would have known. And it was only because I'm so close to our supply chain that I even realized that. A lot of companies are outsourcing production to, let's say, China. And it is legal to print on glass with red ink in China. You can do that there. So it's this idea of how do you continue to be gracious with yourself to understand that you're going to continue to learn, and some of the learnings are going to be things you didn't expect. But yeah, continuing to improve, continuing to show up for yourself and your team, and the long-term sustainability of the business.
Well, I wanted to start bringing in questions from the audience. So we've had a few sent in from before the talk, and then we just had one come in. So, I think it relates to what you just said. So I'm going to start with this question. But we had an audience member say, access to non-toxic products are important for everyone, but Supply's price point is out of reach for most consumers. How are you working to make non-toxic products accessible to more people?
Yeah, this is a pain point for me personally. I never used, so Supply, if you haven't gone to our website yet, Supply is $25 for a bottle. We incentivize individuals to refill. The refill comes down to about what you would pay for example, Mrs. Meyer's at the bodega. But the price point it's hard. The reality is that quality of soap and soap price are directly correlated. And Supply actually prices low on the luxury scale for soap. We're $25, that includes shipping. Shipping, for, in case you're wondering, it's really expensive. Shipping a small bottle of supply can cost up to $7 for us if it's across the country. So one of the things, though, to answer the actual question that we're looking to do is we're building this supply chain from the ground up, sourcing sustainable ingredients that are actually good, that are pure, testing the product to ensure that it's non-toxic. One of the big problems that a lot of companies have is, let's say, for example, coconut oil or olive oil. You source organic coconut or olive oil and it arrives and you assume, okay, I bought pure organic coconut oil. Well, a lot of oils are cut, and what they're cut with can actually be toxic. And as a small company, the cost of actually testing all of that, it's a lot. And so for us, it became a question of how do we price it where we can afford to do this? And it's kind of like the Tesla model, where it's really expensive at first, but as you scale, the cost of each individual product goes down. And the goal for us is to certainly be able to bring the price down. But right now, the reality is paying for good ingredients, paying our craftsmen, actually making the donation that we say we're going to make, paying our team, it all costs money.
Mm-hmm. Understandable. There's definitely trade-offs, right? Like sustainable business is not an easy shot answer. So two other questions that we have. The first one is on zero waste soaps and shampoos. So we had an audience member ask, it seems that there are two different paths for zero waste soaps and shampoos have become common, refillable bottles and then bars of soaps and shampoo.
Mhm.
What was the rationale for offering a refillable bottle as opposed to using bars? And do you think either option is more favorable from a consumer perspective?
Yeah, so I can again speak for Supply, but I really wanted to launch Supply with a bar soap and not liquid soap at all. But it turns out, to me, one of the things that makes sense is to meet consumers where they're willing to be met. Like, how do you start to move the needle? And for me, it was a question of, let's look at the market. What are people buying? Why are they buying it? And it turns out that liquid soap is next to almost every sink in the United States. People are not reaching for bar soap, not in the same numbers. Almost 90% of individuals have liquid soap in their own home. So for us, it became a question of, there are a lot of really good bar soaps out there. I go to the farmer's market in New York City. I can even buy bar soap at the farmer's market. I can ask the individual who actually made it, hey, what's in this soap? How did you make it? When did you make it? Why did you make it lavender scent? Why did you make it bergamot? And they have answers. And the soap is good. But when it comes to liquid soap, you walk into the personal care aisle and you see a huge, end cap of all plastic, single-use plastic bottles. And what's in it is a detergent. It's not a soap. So for us, it became a question of, how do we meet the masses and how do we meet them with a product that they actually are buying and are using? So I do see a huge, I believe in the idea of reducing waste, obviously. As I look forward, I look forward to offering additional offers for consumers who are ready to go there. But giving people an access point is really important to me. So the individual that can buy a bar of soap at the local farmer's market, they should support that local maker. That's kind of my take on that. The other thing that we found in some testing, and this is, again, our experience, is the bar soaps. Again, there's an education that comes with it, especially for the shampoos and different personal care products, is one, it does produce more soap scum. And that's just something people have to get used to, but people aren't entirely used to it just yet. So it's a different approach. It's, to me, I think like all approaches are good approaches. And from the perspective of Supply, it became, where do we enter the market and who are we reaching first? And to me, I do think there's some really, really good bar soaps out there. And yeah, I'd encourage you to use them, tell the world, get more people involved.
I will definitely look out for barred soap at my farmer's market when I go this weekend. So we have 5 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure we get in one last question from an audience member. So they said, wow, that is so interesting about the red ink. Thank you for the presentation, Mara. You said supply is made out of recycled glass and that the manufacturer is in Vermont. I know you guys are a small team, but I'm just curious to see if you have done some sort of a life cycle assessment to see how many GHG emissions and resources such as water are being saved from supplies product design. I think so many of us here are really skeptical of products now because of greenwashing. Some things sound good, but the actual impact sometimes does not match.
Yeah, and I mean, so yeah, an LCA assessment, cradle to cradle approach, all for it. And part of this is where are we now and where are we going? And ensuring that the bottle that's next to your sink is refillable and reusable is really, really important. For us, how we're looking at this is not just short term, it's long term. How do we ensure that the bottle that's next to your sink, that it lasts, not one time, not 10 times, like over 100 times? And how do we ensure that it doesn't leach? We don't want any toxic chemicals from the actual packaging to get into the product itself. And then, where are you storing it? All of these things become questions. If it's under your sink, it turns out, that you're under your sink's a little bit warmer. When it's a little bit warmer, that does a little something different to the packaging itself. It can introduce new problems or issues. So for us, yes, this is kind of a concern, how shipping glass is heavy. And how do we continue to look and say, what more can we do? How do we make this localized? How do we reward people who are doing the right thing? How do we encourage people to continue to refill and reuse their product or the bottle? And how do we make that easier? And I'll just say that, we have a lot of plans on this front. COVID has set some of that back. The reality of what it looks like to shop, in person, refill, has looked a little bit different this year and likely will next year. And that's not to say that we're not pushing things forward and working on them, but it is to say that some of what we would have been excited to share right now with a question like that, we don't currently have the ability to share. But one of the things that we are doing is we've worked with some of our retail partners, and for example, Credo, if you bring back a supply bottle to Credo, they'll make sure that it gets recycled properly. They work with TerraCycle, and then they actually give you reward points. I think if you bring back 10 bottles, you can actually redeem your reward points for a full size product in the store. So it's small stuff, but we are actively working on it, and we're very aware that there's improvements to be made.
Great. Well, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank all the audience members that tuned in for your questions and for showing up today. And Mara, good luck on your journey. And we look forward to seeing what supply does in the future.
Thank you. Happy hand washing.
Thank
Thanks so much, Rachel. And thank you everyone for taking the time to talk.